Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Susanna Harris, and welcome to Grad Chat, produced by PhD Balance, where we talk to a different grad student every week. Thanks for joining us because this is always amazing, and I'm so excited for our guest. But first, I'm going to throw it over to my co-host.
Hi, everyone. So welcome to Grad Chat. My name is Fay Lin, and my co-host who just spoke here was the amazing Susanna Harris. And today we have an incredible guest, Thiago, who, if you saw his amazing PhD Balance takeover with his awesome introduction, Thiago here was born and raised in Brazil, and he's currently a neuroscience PhD candidate in the Medical College of Wisconsin. And before that, he got a chemistry degree at the University of Southern California. So in August, Thiago will be completing 8 years as an international student in the US, and we're very excited to talk with Thiago today about international students and what it's like being abroad. So Thiago, welcome. And yeah, please let us know if there's anything more you want to say about yourself, and we're really excited to have you on today.
Thanks for having me. I'll just correct, it's South Florida, not Southern California. I wish I was in Southern California.
Oh, did I say California?
It's
Yeah,
fine.
just like in California mindset.
Oh, sorry. I'm at UCLA. I'm totally like in in like COVID times. I thought it was like June on the
Nothing makes sense anymore.
Yeah. South Florida.
But yeah,
Thank you.
Been in the US for like 7 years and a half now. It's kind of weird to say that because it doesn't feel like it. And yeah, thanks for having me. It's very exciting to be here, and especially given everything, to just talk about this and like kind of raise awareness for international students in general.
Yeah, exactly. So, and for everyone watching, you can see the title is International Students and Being Abroad. So that's going to be our topic for today. We have a bunch of questions that were asked through Instagram and through Twitter from people who follow PhD Balance. And you can also, if you're watching live, go into our live chat and ask questions, and we'll get to them as they come in. So we're going to be talking about the international student experience. I'm going to let Thiago explain a little bit about why this is an especially important topic this week as we're filming, and also why it's always a very important topic that a lot of us, myself included, don't spend enough time thinking about.
Yeah, so I talked about this a little bit on the Instagram stories side of things, but I think one of the main things with international students is that often the challenges that we face, like with policy changes, are very invisible. Like usually you don't hear about like changes in visa or immigration things on the news. The change last week obviously was the hashtag student ban, which caused like ruckus everywhere. But that was just one instance of ICE doing what ICE does, which is changing policy without congressional approval, without like any actual like thought behind it. There's been other cases where they change like a minor thing on like one type of visa that will like literally affect millions of people, but all of that usually goes like under notice because it's not on everyone's mind. Like, how many international students do we have? On the good side, it means that the people are like actually ingrained in the lab and they're like very naturalized, that you don't think about them being not from the country. But on the other hand, there's going to be grants that they can apply to. There's going to be like, sometimes they can go to a conference, they can go abroad because of their visa status. Sometimes they'll have to like take a day off to go to a consulate. That happens every now and then. All of these minor things add up. So like raising awareness for this, I think it's really important. Just that, yes, everything looks the same and sounds the same, but like sometimes there's like a lot under the hood that we're not seeing.
Yeah, no, I loved your PhD Balance takeover yesterday because I think what you just said resonates with a lot of people, where if you're not in this position of an international student, there are so many behind the hood things that you don't really think about. And this idea about all of these different kinds of visas, you had this great post just outlining, what the differences between visas, what the jargon is. And I think that is so important for everyone to be informed about, that I know I personally also can do a much better job of educating myself in what it's like to be an international student. And I thought that was really, really cool how you really brought that information to light. So that, I think that is such an important point. Just if you're not in a position or in the same situation, take the time to get to know what another person is experiencing and educate yourself about, if it's like the different logistical things about visas, etc. That is so important, I think, in this discussion.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned how many international students, like what, is this a big population, or is this kind of, you know?
Let me pull up, if I don't think we have like 2020 or 2019 numbers. I think the latest one we have is from 2018, but it was 1 million students in the US.
Wow.
Which it's about 5% of the total population.
Mm-hmm.
And I said that on Instagram, and I'll say it again. I hate the economic argument, but they do bring like something like it's like a third of the whole tuition of the country, like it's from international students, because most of the times they're paying out of state tuition. Yeah, some students have like scholarships and whatnot, but also international students don't qualify for loans. So most of these students are paying out of pocket, or they're just like doing loans at home, and then like they're gonna pay back in their home country. So yeah, it's a big economic force. That is one of the reasons I think why this student ban this week got like so out of proportion. Like the cynical in me wants to say that is one of the main reasons people are thinking about their money, especially universities. But it is a huge population, and that's only for international students on F1 visas. So you have on the Instagram post, they put it like the J1, the H1B. So you have a host of other like visas. I don't think we have a way to quantify like exactly how many international scholars, or like not just students, but like postdocs and faculty as well. But it's obviously over 1 million people.
I mean, the pieces you just brought up there of like, I think, yeah, I think for me in that takeover, one of the shocking numbers was that of how many students, how many people are really driving the academic system. But you also had a really interesting fact about the number of, is it Nobel Prize winner, or what kind of prize winners was this?
First generation immigrants account for 34% of all the US Nobel laureates. So it's people like me who came to the US to study, to do the research, ended up staying here, still consider immigrants, and had results that warrant a Nobel Prize. And someone even like DM'd me on that and asked me if that counts for second and third generation, and it doesn't. I don't know how high that number would go if it was for second and third generation, so like kids and grandkids from immigrants.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a really good question coming in from Rob. I just learned their name because it's always been phonetical, who's been on so many of our chats. And I do also want to say, for people who are watching who might be like, oh, there's amazing stats everywhere, I'm sad I missed it. We're going to keep these up as a part of our highlights in the PhD Balance Instagram. So go check it out no matter when you're seeing this video. But Rob asks, if immigration suddenly changes while you are abroad, so in this case, like what's happening with ICE, could it cut your study short? And would you still owe on that? So if you're cut short, are you still indebted to the US system? Or do you like default because of politics?
So I don't think like anything that dramatic will happen. What I've been talking to other international students and other friends, I do worry about the H-1B visa, which is the high skill employment. And I do worry that they might come up with some way of curbing F1 visas in the future. But overall, we're pretty protected as far as we don't leave the country. That's where you're going to hear from like most international students' offices, is as long as you don't leave the country, technically your visa can expire. And if you are legally, like if your school is, like if you're still in school and your other documents are correct, you can still stay in the country. And that's just one of the other things, like we need to know all these rules of like, right now I cannot leave the US, but I'm still legally allowed to stay here because my visa already expired, but my I-20 is not expired yet, and it won't expire for another year or two. Um, Most of the times the schools do a good job of like protecting their students and like making sure that while they're in the US, they're safe. But what we saw with the student ban is that a lot of these kids are now at home kids, like I'm on all that. A lot of these people are at home, and like for Brazil instance, I have friends in Brazil that are not able to come back to US because the borders are literally closed because of COVID. Um, and if they won't be able to come back, obviously the classes will have to be online. So most of the times the issue is not necessarily like stopping your program halfway through while you're studying. It's mostly getting into the country or even like trying to leave. Like I don't know if you guys saw it. This was back when the H1B thing happened like a month ago. It was like very sad stories of people having like parents and grandparents pass away at home and then they can't go visit, or like missing weddings, missing like big life events at home because they can't leave.
Yeah, and it seems like right now with everything happening, I mean, international students are just in an impossible situation right now, from my point of view. So,
yeah, no, from this discussion, there's just so many layers to everything going on. You know, Thiago, you described how if international students are protected in the country, that itself, you know, can be good, but at the same time, there's just so many layers of like, if it's like the bureaucracy navigating the visa system, or what happens if you do have to leave the country. Like that is one of the, I think, biggest topics or challenges, is that this protection, as you described, is mostly within the US, and it's hard to navigate what happens outside, which is, as you mentioned, this student ban is creating so much. Well, first of all, it's absolutely gross, this student ban, and it is creating so much unrest, justified unrest, because it's just not treating international students as people at the end of the day. And there's just so many layers that I through this chat, I do want to, maybe we can ask one of these other questions that we've gotten to kind of poke through all of these different layers that we have here. So one question that we have now, Thiago, you mentioned that, you know, this protection within the US. One question someone put in is, have you ever had to deal with xenophobia from another student or postdoc? How did you deal with that? Or how would you recommend dealing with that knowing the US system?
So November 5th, right after in 2016, right after Trump got elected, one student and one tech both like made some pretty racist comments, or I guess xenophobic, not racist. One student just said like, "Oh, I thought you'd be home by now," like meaning I thought you'd go back to Brazil. And then the other tech, who I wonder why got fired, made some comment about like, it was me and a German student in the lab at the time, and she made some like xenophobic comments about like, well, we're not going to see much more of you guys now. And there's a lot of microaggressions that you go through every day. I know my male privilege, so like I know like some of these aggressions are not going to be as intense as someone who has a darker skin, who identifies as a woman. So I don't go through a lot of what other people do, but I do get the stupid like, "Oh, I thought Brazil was just like a bunch of like forests," or "I thought you guys were just like naked at the beach the whole time." I don't know how to deal with that. By now, like it basically doesn't get through anymore because I've listened to so much of this that I'm like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And it kind of goes back to what I said about the schools being good at protecting. So what I meant is that physically, like around the school, it's usually where students feel most protected because of that bubble, that like academic bubble. Because you'll see Indian students, Vietnamese students, you see Chinese students, you have like this diversity inside that little academic bubble. But most of the time, walk like half a mile down the block and then you're like met with the real world that's not inside the university. And then you meet the real American people. That's where you see most of those like kind of insensitive questions and like comments and whatnot. So it is hard. I think one of the things that helps the most is usually like finding other international students, finding even other like different groups of minorities. They usually tend to have the same kind of like microaggressions every day. So they'll understand most of that. They'll be sympathetic to that. And finding allies as well on campus. That usually helps most.
Yeah, and kind of following up on that, we had an interesting kind of a question about this specifically and about how to protect yourself. So it's asking, what is a question that you'd recommend prospective international students to ask a PI to ensure they don't meet someone racist or xenophobic? And I think it's interesting also this word meet. So maybe I'd love to hear your thoughts on this kind of question.
That is hard. I don't know if there's like a single question. You generally, like, especially if you're doing an interview, like a grad school interview, if they tend to get like hung up a lot on your Brazilianness or your like Chineseness, like if they tend to hang up a lot on like cultural stereotypes or a lot of people tend to be very and they do this as a compliment, but it is an aggression of like, oh, your English is so good, like thanks, I've been here for 7 fucking years, like like yours is not that great. So a lot of people tend to get hung up on the language, hung up on cultural stereotypes. It's not necessarily what you ask, it's more like what they ask you. They'll ask you like random questions about being Chinese in the US, or random questions about like what is happening in your country right now. Like you as an international student don't owe anyone an explanation of like what is going on in your country. Like an Iranian student doesn't have to come here and like explain what is going on in Iran politics. And most of the times you'll listen more than you ask anyway in interviews. So like you listen to those cues of like, no, maybe not here. And also, and this is valuable for job interviews, grad school interviews, any kind of interviews, ask other students, ask trainees. They'll know who the problematic PIs are, who that one person is, or they'll tell you like, oh, he meant well, or which usually doesn't do much. But ask other people as well, like, is he or she, are they a good person? Are they a good mentor? That's one advice that I give every time there's people interviewing our school.
Yeah, that sounds like stuff that I think it's important for everyone to do, and especially if you might be putting yourself into a situation where you're unfairly judged or unfairly just treated, to think about who is going to be honest. But I love that point of picking up those context cues and just like really listening and protecting yourself.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that's such an important tip, because we get this question a lot, like what can I ask potential grad schools certain questions to make sure that this is a place that I belong in. And I love how you highlighted, Thiago, to look at these context clues, and sometimes it's not really about their words or the content of their answers, but maybe just in their mannerisms or behavior. You can see certain microaggressions that happen in their response that are all important pieces of information when you are asking these questions, that it's not just about what the content is, but also just the context and their behavior that gives you so much information.
Especially when the interview is over, like those like little periods in our school, like students walk one person from like one interview to the other. Those little hallway talks, those little moments where you're not in the interview and you hear someone saying something like racist, you're like, oh, so that's who you really are. Especially like, I don't know if this happens in other schools, but we have like a social right after the interview. So like the students can meet like all the other students. Most of the times when like everybody's guards down, you see more of those cues. You see more of those like, ooh, okay, maybe not here, maybe like not that person. But yeah, it's always the small things. I don't think we it's always the microaggressions, which I saw something on Twitter the other day, which is great because they're literally just aggressions. They're not micro in any way. Like they're still aggressions.
Yeah, no, I love how you brought up this idea of hallway talk, because I think when people prepare for these interviews or any sort of discussion you're going to have with like a potential advisor, you don't really think about keeping an eye out for the hallway talk or these other types of places where you can interact. You don't really prepare for hallway talk, right? You're maybe not even as attuned to that idea that you'll get some valuable information from those interactions. So that's, I think, such a great point to highlight when it comes to figuring out if this place is going to be a place that you want to call your new PhD life or new home. Yeah, so let's see, we have another question here that was submitted beforehand that says, what's the best thing a PI could do to make sure an international student feels comfortable at their lab?
I think listening is a great way, especially right now, like the world's literally fire, but a lot of times students are going to start venting and then the PI is going to try to fix their problems at home. Like they want the PI, but a lot of people do that where they're trying to fix a problem instead of just sit down and listening. Chances are that the way you're looking at Chinese politics or like South African politics, it's in a simplified way. Like you have your own stereotypes and you're trying to fix a country's problem that you don't really understand. Or it's just like a very personal thing. Like, I don't know, like a grandparent died and you just want to vent about that for a minute. I think listening is so important and so overlooked in academia because we have that mentality of like, oh, that happened. Let's try to fix this. Let's try to like, let's break down this problem. Like, no, just shut up and listen for a minute. That is, I think, number one, especially lab meetings are like this wild experience. Everyone should go into at least one lab meeting in their lives to see how weird they are. I think a lot of that happens in lab meetings where the like beginning before you present any data and start talking science is usually where you're like, how's everything? How's life? Those little moments. My PI is doing like amazing job. Every time I meet her, I'm like thinking about like, oh, she's gonna ask about that experiment. She's gonna ask about this, and she's like, how's your mom? I'm like, oh. No, she's so great of like just asking like, how's everything? Like, you're good. Like, do you need anything? Just being there like mentally and like also like if you need help, like, do you need help going to the groceries? Do you need help this? Like, international students are usually like, I don't know, excuse my French, but they're shit out of luck. They usually don't have a car. They're usually like living away because they didn't know where to live when they moved in first. They usually don't like have the connections of their first or second year. So a lot of these things are like very pragmatic too. Like, do you need a ride to the grocery shop? Do you need a like if you have an appointment somewhere, do you need a ride? And just being available most of the time. And yes, I understand that like none of this is science related, but like most of the times they're gonna thrive and they're gonna do a lot better in their science if they're not worrying about like, do I have food at home? Do I have all my documents in order? Do I have like, is my mom back home okay? Like, is everyone back home okay? So yeah, availability is key, I think.
Yeah, and kind of related to that, you brought up something in the chat and you had this cool graph talking about culture shock. And one of the questions was, what was the biggest surprise you got about US culture? So yeah, like what was that transition like?
I said that and I'm always going to be blown away by the fact that I lived here for 4 years, went to college here, interacted with American people for 4 years, went through that phase, those like 4 or 5 phases, depends on the graph. And then I moved here to Wisconsin and I went through all of it again. I'm like, what is this? What is happening? Therapy is amazing, but a lot of that, a lot of that is just like realizing that you are in new perspective, regardless of whether you've been in the US for so long or not. I think one of the things that keeps me surprised, like keeps me very like on my feet every time I become really good friends with an American person is that like I don't know how to explain this well, but like the definitions of friendships or like the meaning of the word friends is very varied across cultures. Brazilian people will like bend over backwards to like help you if they're mad, like whether they just met you or they've been friends forever, like they'll help you and they'll like try their best to like accommodate every need possible. Like if you see two Brazilian people who never met each other and you leave them for 5 minutes, they'll come back like as BFFs. Like they literally always known each other. While in the US, there's like this, excuse the metaphor, but there's a wall and it takes like so long to get to know this person, like finally become their friend. And then even then, like sometimes they'll say something, you're like, oh, what? That still like throws me off balance, like those weird little things. I remember like this was mostly in college where like things are always weird. But I had a friend for like 4 years, an American friend. And I asked him for like a ride or something, like something like very like minor. And they said like they were so rude and so like weird that I don't think I ever talked to them again. But it's like realizing that friendships mean different things, or friends mean different things in different cultures. I did travel abroad to France while I was traveling abroad in the US. And they said the same thing of like French people versus American people. So they also have that kind of like different perspective on friendships and like on networking as well.
Mm. Yeah, I've certainly heard from students of all different backgrounds that networking can be extremely intimidating. You had a cool story in your takeover where you were talking about potentially getting a tattoo, and so you went and talked to a professor, and that led to things like, yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about that story? I like that
like
story.
Zero notion of professionalism or like what to do, like no idea. This was a month after I arrived in the US, like still like barely speaking English coherently, like very unaware of all the social cues and like context of the place. But I wanted to get this tattoo, the heme B molecule. It's like the molecule that carries oxygen in your blood. I love this tattoo like ever since high school. I still need to get a tattoo. I haven't yet.
I was gonna ask you too. I was like, I was gonna ask after the show, but
right now I'm like leaning towards more narrow based tattoos. I think I'm gonna get a narrow tattoo soon. But yeah, I wanted to get that tattoo, but I didn't know about the molecule structure because like I wasn't sure if it was right or not. And this guy was studying porphyrin rings, those big resonance rings that heme B is part of. I literally like when I say lucky, I mean like he was in his office. Like how many times do you see a PI with this door open in his office? This was like, I don't know, like a Tuesday afternoon, like a random ass day. I literally just knocked and like, hi. And I was wearing like this geeky t-shirt of like an mRNA structure, completely like by accident. And I was just like, with a little like 5x5 inches picture of the tattoo, like, can we talk about this tattoo? And we ended up talking for like over an hour of like, he asked me like a bunch of questions about catalysts, about like organic chemistry. He was like, do you know like how radical chemistry works? I'm like, sure, I know what a radical is. He explained his research and he was like, I think he was so surprised that I was interested and like that I was like super into it. He literally finished like, let me introduce you to my postdoc. And then he introduced me to this postdoc. And then like a week later, they invited me to like a little like internal conference. And I started working like the next week in the lab. Ended up getting published as an undergrad, ended up like winning awards and traveling to like present in organic chemistry conferences. Turns out I'm not like the best organic chemist ever. I'm also like not super passionate about like the research field in general. I still love chemistry, but not that.
I have to no, you just said you got published as an undergrad. You're like, I'm not the best organic chemist. Oh like come on, Thiago. And this whole story, you're like, oh, super lucky. Like you took initiative. I think that it's really interesting to hear some of your stuff where it's just like you're like kicking ass and taking names. And I don't know. I just like I'm over here like shaking my head, like, come on. Like you're so awesome and just sorry.
Yeah. No, I just want to also second that because it takes, especially as an undergrad, I think it takes a lot of I don't know what the right word is, but skill, confidence, or all of that along those lines. No,
I think I literally just didn't know what I was doing. I showed up. Like if I were to tell an undergrad now, I'm like, let's structure an email. Let's email them. You have to email them in the morning. Like right now, I know that like that's not the best approach. It was just like, I'll just go. Like, what's the worst could happen? Like he's not gonna be there.
That was amazing.
It really is an amazing story, and I also love how you're bringing in, like, if you were to give tips to people now, you know, structure the email and send it at a specific time, because we all have, I think, these more professional, like, unsaid rules about how to do things, and those are valuable to know for sure. And I also think it's really cool to hear these stories where, you know, scientists are human, and you walk into their office having a great chat, getting excited about science, and that turning into it sounds like an amazing, you know, professional connection that helped you get into science. So it's really interesting, because sometimes we might focus a lot on making sure this email is correct, but it's also really cool to not hold yourself back from walking into someone's office and having a conversation about why I like science. And that can turn into something incredible. So I think that's a really, really cool story. So, yeah.
I want to ask one last question in the live and then give you a little bit of time just to tell us other interesting things. But Vitali asks, who do you ask the pragmatic questions when you arrive? So like, where to live? Is it essential to drive? Where isn't it safe to walk or take public transport? You know, should be talking to PIs, graduate program admins. Like, who do you go to?
I'm gonna be very real here. Ask the people that are gonna have the same paycheck as you. Like, don't ask a PI who's getting like an extra zero on their account, because yes, they will be nice to you, but they're not gonna live those 5-6 years with the same paycheck. Ask students, and especially like ask students who you're like already, if you interviewed there and you like made some connection, ask those students. But don't be afraid of cold emailing students. Like almost every grad program has like a current student's website or something like that. Stalk them on LinkedIn. Students are so approachable that like anyone that emails me, I'm like, oh my god, oh my god, this is so exciting. Students are like always willing to like help. They might be busy and they'll like still try to help. I asked a bunch of people. I ended up like visa stuff again, but like I ended up like Airbnb for the first week when I moved here for grad school, because I got here like 3 months late. Anyway, the person who found me like my first year's home was someone who like took a picture of like a little poster board that had like available like apartments around the place. So it's usually going to be students. It's usually going to be like the people closest to you as far as like hierarchy goes. The other pragmatic questions, so like visa arrival, deadlines, what documents you need, what like important stuff you need. Usually it's going to be your like officer, like your designated international officer or something like that. But don't be afraid of Googling as well, because especially if you're in a small school like I am right now, I'm pretty sure that most of our 10, 20 international students know more than our school officer sometimes, just because they're not responsible for just that. Bigger schools will have people that are just responsible for that. So yeah, students mostly for the day-to-day things, but for important document stuff, I'm not gonna like go to your kind of like that like medical advice, like go to the professional.
Awesome. All right, we are getting toward the end of our grad chat, but Thiago, is there any additional topics that you want to bring up that we haven't covered yet, or anything that you want to bring to grad chat before we wrap up for today?
I think like kind of like that call to action kind of thing of like get involved. Petitions are great. They're not going to change the world, but they call a lot of attention to the problem. So if something has 1 million signatures, it's usually getting its like own news article about it. It usually gets covered in the media more. So there's like 2 or 3 petitions going on for the student ban. I don't think the student ban is going to go through. I don't think it's going to last, but I do think that the damage is kind of done. As the MIT, Harvard, and like now 50, 60 other more schools are suing the government, that's still going to take like a couple of months at best to go through and to like clean up everything. Meanwhile, schools are going to have to hustle up and like come up with ways of like having presence but online classes. I do worry more about like 6 months from now, after the election, regardless of the result, those like little attacks of like trying to chip into immigration policy will continue to happen. I think the H-1B visa is like definitely one of the biggest targets. So for people who didn't see the Instagram post, say the H-1B visa is the high skill temporary visa. So this is usually what postdocs or faculties or PhD students like right out of their PhDs will go towards. Right now, the system as it is, it's already shitty. Excuse my French. If you're not in academia, you have to go through a little lottery to get this visa. So let's say I want to go and work for Thermo Fisher, like another industry. My career, regardless of like my qualifications, will depend on a lottery visa, or on a visa lottery. That is just a horrible system. Everything has to be filled out by paper. There's like instructions, like if you write in a blue pen, you will get denied. All of these like small things need to be reformed. So get involved, like know the people around you that are on an H-1B visa. In academia is a little less common. Most people are either students or J1s. But like the more, and this is like blew my mind the other day, a couple months ago.
Same thing.
International students are not just like, we don't just face these invisible problems. We're visible as far as policy goes because we don't vote. American people vote. So if like I want to get all my international students friends together and go to DC, they'll laugh at us because like, what are you going to do? Vote us out of office? I don't think so. I was talking to someone in DC about this, and yeah, like we're not constituents. We pay taxes, we live in a place, but when we go talk to a congressperson, they'll go like, okay, but who's voting for you? Who's your actual voice in the ballot? So we need those American allies, those people who can vote to like go and raise those issues, to go and talk about immigration reform, or talk about like, not necessarily just the student ban, but like protecting international students, protecting international scholars. And in the end, I think it all goes back to like, if you want the US to continue to be this like beacon of research, which I think it still is, you're still going to need immigrants to come here.
Awesome. Well, there's a ton of questions that we didn't get to, but Thiago, you have your Instagram, Twitter handle there below you, and we have it in the links. And I will also say, I made myself a note that we will add links to some of those petitions, and also maybe some links to other information that you talked about. Are you comfortable with people reaching out to you with questions, following you, chatting?
Yeah, I'm all open doors. I did make like a little Google Doc. I can send you the link for that. It has like a bunch of resources.
That would be perfect. That would be perfect. All right. Well, this was amazing. Faye, do you want to take us out?
Yes, thank you all for watching another episode of Grad Chat. And thank you, Thiago, for bringing in such awesome perspectives of what the international student experience is like, especially given our current times. It's especially crucial that we all have these discussions right now. So Grad Chat happens every Saturday at this time, whatever time zone you're in, 12 p.m. for California. And yeah, we usually have our guests on Friday take over PhD Balance. So you heard us referencing Thiago's awesome takeover throughout this Grad Chat. So please keep an eye out on Fridays on PhD Balance's Instagram, where our guests will share a little bit about themselves and also some information about the topic that we're going to talk about that week. Yeah. So with that,
and we've got a bunch more signing up. Like we've got so many people that are going to talk. And it was great. Okay. Yes.
Woo.
All right. Thank you to everyone who watched, and we will see you next week. Woo! We did.